What's going on, folks? Ted from NERDIMMERSION here, and it's Tuesday, and you're actually getting a top 10 on time, so yay me. Then my patrons voted. We're going to be talking about my top 10 monstrosities. So this is the creature type monstrosities as found in the variety of different 5th edition resources, and it has to be an official 5e creature from a 5e published source or extra life document, but not anything third party. This was really difficult. First of all, right? I had a best list of about 25, and I cut it down to 10. There may be more monstrosities than there are any other creature type in 5e, so getting this list culled down to just 10 was really, really hard. I should also say it's my top 10, not the best, not the worst, just my personal top 10 favorites. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So let me talk to you about today's sponsor, Describe. Describe is a relatively new platform and tool out there for DMs, old and new alike, to create immersive, descriptive text for you to use in your own game. If you're like me, you got a million things going on all the time, so you're trying to come up when you're running games with something descriptive or interesting to talk about really anything, and you start stumbling over your words and you just kind of lose the players and it kills the mood. So Describe is a team of writers that can basically take that off your shoulders and do it all for you. My kind of promo text here says 1600 scenes. The website says 1800 plus, so let's go with that. And that's basically what you'll see here is described as a scene, right? They have things for monsters, spells, maps. They're working on items and characters, and they have virtual tabletop integration. But if I were to go over here and click on a kobold, I could show you, I could say just there's a kobold, or I could say shorter than a halfling, but of similar build, this orange-skinned humanoid has a reptilian head with pointed dog-like ears. It wears a clay pot as a hat or helmet, through which it has broken holes for its ears, while in its hand it wields a dagger big enough to serve it like a short sword. So I can have this interesting descriptive text written for me by a team of writers. I can choose to save these. I have a variety of different search options. I can even have different maps with interesting kind of tooltip information that I can even change from winter to summer or things like that. If you want to take a quick look at the pricing, you can choose to buy specific things if you want just monsters or maps. You can choose those per month or annually, or you can get the hero subscription for $8.79 a month or $79 annually. That'll get you access to everything. And I happen to have a coupon code. So if you head over to describe.com/nerdimmersion, that's DSCRYB.com/nerdimmersion, and sign up there, the first 50 people who do so and use the coupon code NERDIMMERSION at checkout will get $5 off that subscription. If you want to support me and the channel and maybe help take that first step as to being a DM, or maybe, you know, just improve the way you keep the party engaged, or, you know, again, try something different. It's an interesting new tool. We haven't really seen anything like this before. So I'm going to be using Describe myself, and in fact, any monstrosities that they have covered on the website that are in this video, I'll be starting that off with the Describe text. So thank you, Describe, for sponsoring this video. Again, check out those links in the description, and if you're one of the first 50 people, enjoy that $5 off your subscription. Number 10. In the darkness, the thing descends without a sound, gliding from the ceiling like a fallen leaf. Its wide bottom ends in tentacle-like appendages, each tipped with a wicked barb and connected by a thin, leathery membrane. A single blood-red eye peers from the thing's cylindrical top, which resembles the stalagmites and stalactites of the surrounding cave. Before you can react, darkness envelops you, and you feel the thing's tentacles wrap around your head, neck, and shoulders. That's right, folks. We are talking about Darkmantles, the sort of cave squid octopi camouflage floaty guy. What great description. I know, obviously I'll let Describe do the talking for me. But yeah, I love Darkmantles. The only kind of bummer that I think is they get very quickly outclassed. Like, they're cool and they're fun and I like using them, but once a party reaches a certain, like, really past like level 3, I feel like unless you're doing swarms of these things or you're coming up with some homebrew version to make them stronger, they're very quickly outclassed. They don't have a ton of hit points. They don't have a very high AC. And they don't even have that thing where they can, like, split the damage if they grab you. They have echolocation, right? They use blind sense, which works with their darkness aura. They're completely undistinguishable from a cave structure if they choose not to move or open their eyes. And again, like I said, they can do once a day this darkness aura, basically similar to a darkness spell. Dark vision can't penetrate it, and the benefit for them is they can engulf you in darkness, but they have blind sense, or blind sight rather, so they can see you and still attack you perfectly normally in the darkness while you can't see out of it. And their main ability is Crush, but it's not just an attack that does bludgeoning damage. If they're medium or smaller, the target is anyway, they have advantage on the attack roll, they're engulfed, they're blinded, and they start to suffocate. So at low levels, especially if you don't have a particularly strong character or a group of strong characters, a Darkmantle can be pretty devastating because it might not kill you maybe outright initially with just the damage, but the fact that you are blinded, your attack rolls have disadvantage, its attack rolls against you have advantage, and you're suffocating. If you don't have a high constitution, you could succumb to suffocation long before the thing is able to kill you by dealing bludgeoning damage. I think they're really cool. Obviously, I would love to see like a dire Darkmantle or some sort of improved version of these show up in a future book. I've seen some homebrew ones, and I think they exist in older editions, ones that have sort of psionic or psychic abilities. Just make a stronger version so that like they're a really cool thing, and I don't love throwing ropers everywhere, and these are a cool thing that look like a stalactite that can attack your party. Number 9. Cave Fishers. It's probably due to the Drizzt novels, and they're pretty prominent in some of the early ones, but I love Cave Fishers. I think they're really cool. I'm not a huge fan of the way they're treated in 5th edition. I think a couple tweaks could make them more in line to what I'm used to from those novels, but either way, they're pretty cool. They're, again, another blind sight underdark creature, and they're sort of like this blind lobster spider scorpion thing. And they're sort of, their main thing is this adhesive filament ability, right? So what this does is they can basically shoot out a string of sticky filament, kind of comes out of their mouth, as you can see in the image here, and it sticks to stuff. If you're adhered to it, you're considered grappled. The DC is 13 to escape. Ability checks made to escape that grapple do have disadvantage, which is, I think if the DC was a little bit higher, they'd be a lot more scary or deadlier. It can be attacked as an AC of 15 and 5 hit points, which again, it's super strong, but it only has 5 hit points, so it's pretty easy to hit. If you are able to not sever it, like you roll damage lower than 5 and you try to cut it, your weapon becomes adhered to it as well, which is kind of a cool thing. And then I obviously can just extrude new ones. One thing that I do think is interesting is that its blood is flammable. If it has less than half hit points, it gets vulnerability to fire, which I'm trying to think about in the lore why that exists, and I didn't really see anything here, but that's an interesting thing. It obviously can climb on all surfaces, kind of like a spider. It has its claw attacks, which are pretty sizable, right? 2d6 plus 3, that's a decent amount of damage for a challenge rating 3 creature. And then it has the filament, which is its action, but it says one creature grappled by the filament must make a DC 13 strength save, and if they, provided that they weigh less than 200 pounds, because that's sort of the tensile strength of the filament. But if they fail, it reels them in, and this is out to 60 feet, right? So it can reel them 55 feet in a turn, right? So that's how fast these things can zip you in. Anywhere along it, so whatever the target that's grappled, anybody else along the chain is let loose, and you're reeled in. And if it pulls you, and you're pulled into a space within 5 feet, and then it can make a claw attack against you as a bonus action. And then obviously it can't grapple anybody else with filament unless if it already has someone. But it's also interesting, right, because there's a whole bit in the lore about how every part of their body is useful, right? Their blood can be used to make booze because it's sort of a very strong alcohol against the fire thing. Their filaments can be woven into super strong ropes, and apparently if you cook their meat, it tastes just like crab. And then apparently there's also some stuff about people using fire to rear get the eggs, hatch them, and then using fire to sort of train them and basically get your own trained cave fishers. But they also can spit filament similar to a spider web and kind of lay it out, so they can use this to grab like flying bats or things in the Underdark. They're pretty cool. A couple of these guys can really mess up a party, especially towards lower levels. If you get 2 or 3 of these, you can really start pulling people and splitting the party that way. Especially if you're ambushing people. Very cool. Number 8. Should have said the Cave Fisher was from Volo's Guide, as is the Banderhobb. Honestly, I think I like this monster so much because it reminds me of that one Toad villain from that one episode of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. if you know, you know, where he basically eats the Rangers. And this is what this guy reminds me of. So I think it's just a nostalgia trip. I mean, you can see he's eating somebody. I also think it's cool that they are often like guardians, or here it says, right, the Coven of Night Hags devised a ritual that led to the creation of the first Banderhobb. A hag that knows the ritual might be willing to teach it for the right price. But basically they can be like a hag guardian, or hags can teach you how to make them. I often like taking hags and using Banderhobbs as sort of like the bully bouncer kind of situation, so you can combo that together as a pretty good working relationship between hag magic and Banderhobb just brawn. They're immune to charm and frighten, which is a nice thing for them. They're really good at tracking, right? It says if they have any piece of anything related to you, they can figure out where you are within a mile. And they can hide in dim light as a bonus action, or darkness. Their bite does 5d6 plus 5 piercing damage, which is a ton of damage. And then you are grappled with a DC 15 escape. If you're large or smaller, you're grappled rather. And if you're grappled, you are also restrained, and that grapple is an auto grapple. It bites you, you are grappled, you are also restrained. That prevents it from using its bite again, or its tongue ability, which does have a 15-foot reach, does necrotic damage. And then if it hits you, you need to make a strength saving throw, and it can pull you in. Again, similar to the Cave Fisher, similar to the creature in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. But basically, yeah, if you're within 15 feet, it'll pull you to a space within 5, and then use a bonus action to bite you. So it can reel you in, dealing necrotic damage, and then use a bonus action to bite you, which then will grapple and restrain you. So it has a decent amount of combo and synergy just in its own abilities. It also has a swallow ability, again, as dictated here in the art. But if you're medium or smaller and you're being grappled, if it hits you with a bite attack, which again, if you're grappled and restrained, the attacks will have advantage. You're then swallowed, and then it follows kind of standard swallow rules. It also has a shadow teleportation ability where it can teleport up to 30 feet to an unoccupied space of dim light or darkness. Before or after teleporting, it can make a bite or tongue attack. So it can bite you, grapple, restrain you, and then teleport, or teleport to then do that. It has a lot of options, and it looks like a big frog, and I like frogs. Number 7. Winter wolves are, again, I don't know, I have like a weird thing. I like just certain animals, and then I'm automatically, maybe it's not weird, but I'm automatically drawn to creatures of that type. For me, that would be things like frogs, crabs, crocodiles, alligators, wolves, bears. So any kind of different version of that, I'm always drawn to, especially if they can do something cool. And winter wolves, in my mind, are the epitome of that, because they're not only a large wolf, so you can live out your dire wolf fantasies here. You could ride them if you're a medium or small creature. They have immunity to cold damage, which is a pretty common damage type. They can talk and speak common, so if you've ever wanted an animal that could talk, you know, positives and negatives aside, they can do that. They can also speak giant and winter wolf. They speak 3 languages, folks. That's pretty impressive for a wolf. They have perception and stealth proficiencies, keen hearing and smell. They get the benefits of pack tactics like wolves have, and advantage on dex stealth checks in snowy terrain. They have a bite, which does 2d6 plus 4 damage, and if it's a creature, they can then knock them prone with a strength saving throw. And if that wasn't enough, they also have a breath weapon, right? I mean, it's a dog wolf with an ice breath, which is just epic in my mind. It is a 15-foot cone, so nothing too crazy, but basically, you know, this thing is the same distance as a Burning Hands, but the damage is better because it's 4d8 cold damage. It is a low dexterity 12, DC 12 dexterity saving throw to succeed, but you do take half damage on a failure, or sorry, half damage on a success rather. So yeah, I don't know. I just really like them. I probably harkens back to like getting improved familiar in 3.5 and choosing a winter wolf as my familiar, because you have a breath weapon and there's all sorts of cool stuff. I think they'd make an excellent sidekick if you're using sidekick rules as well. I don't know. I just like them a lot. I try to throw them in my game from now and then to get into that interesting, like, are they... A lot of people, I feel like, when they play winter wolves, play them as vicious, mindless creatures. They have an intelligence of 7, and they can speak 3 languages. They have the opportunity to be intelligent and try and talk their way out of things. Number 6. The ground trembles. Bursting forth from a snowbank, the creature comes, a careening blue blur of death. Something akin to the mingling of a worm, centipede, and dragon, the beast moves in a bewildering serpentine pattern, its dozens of legs hurtling it forward at a speed belied by its immense mass. Wing-like membranes grow along the beast's sides, unfurling, probing for prey or obstructions in the path. With a screech, the worm rises up on its many legs, clicking mandibles with ravenous anticipation. That's right, folks. We are talking about the Remorhaz. I love these creatures. I have always been intrigued by them because they have a lot of interesting things. And even veteran players, I feel like, still fall for some of the traps, right? They are immune to cold and fire damage. They are blue. They live in snowbanks. People immediately think ice, beat it with fire. They are immune. They are also immune to cold damage, the two most common things you probably would throw at a creature. If it's either like a fire creature, you might throw cold damage, or a cold creature, you might throw fire damage. It's got immunity to both. It has tremor sense. It can burrow underground, so it can pop up and get people. It can sense them through the ground, even if they're hiding. And it has this ability, Heated Body, which whenever it takes damage from someone within 5 feet, the person takes retaliatory 3d6 fire damage. So that's a great thing where you're just dealing damage at people whenever they hit them. That's a great way to make people think twice and possibly shut down your marshals, if that's an option, right? And let the ranged or the spellcasters get to it. Its bite attack, it has a reach of 10 feet, 6d10 plus 7 piercing damage, plus 3d6 fire damage. That's a big hit. And if you manage to crit on that, forget it. You're going to be leveling players. And they're grappled with a DC 17 to break it. And if they're grappled, they're restrained, and there's no size limit on that grapple or restrain. And then again, as per typical with large or huge style creatures, really, when they have a grapple and a bite attack that's a grapple and restrain, that gives them the opportunity to swallow the creature whole. And then again, it follows the sort of standard swallow whole mechanics. I like these a lot. There's even stats for young versions in the monster manual. These are all in the basic rules. One thing I like to potentially add to these, because it reminds me a lot of, if you've ever played Lost Planet or Lost Planet 2, the original ones, not the third one, it kind of changes, but the original Lost Planets, these creatures very much remind me of the monsters from that. And if you haven't played Lost Planet, I recommend checking it out. It's a pretty fun game. I wish Capcom would bring it back. But they were sort of these big sort of monster creatures with these glowing sort of red or orange, showing off how they had their thermal energy. And one thing that I would probably add to Remorhaz, if you want to step it up a notch, is a death burst ability, right? When they die, maybe the sort of energy has to dissipate very quickly, and it does that in an explosive manner. There are a bunch of monsters in 5e that have like death throw abilities where they die, they blow up, and I think it fits really well on the Remorhaz. Number 5. The Ironscale Hydra. This is basically, in a lot of sense, similar to the existing Hydra that you would find in the basic rules. However, this one comes to us from Mythic Odysseys of Theros, and it has one really unique ability. Now, if I were to, say, duplicate this page and go back and pull up the other Hydra, you'll see that basically it is, again, almost identical if you compare the two. But this one has one interesting ability, and it's this acidic blood. So if we were to compare the two, you'll see they both can hold their breath. They both have a swim speed. They have this whole multiple head ability where they have advantage on saving throws. Basically any kind of mental or mind-affecting saving throw, blinded, charmed, deafened, frightened, and so on. Because there are so many heads, that gives them an opportunity. If this one is stunned, this one can still do things. Whenever it takes 25 or more damage in... for the Ironscale Hydra, it's 35. 35 or more damage in a single turn. One of its heads dies. If all of its heads die, it dies. So you can do that if you kill all the heads. But at the end of its turn, it grows 2 heads for each head that died during the last turn. So again, if you're dealing a ton of damage up front, that's really good, and you can kill it outright. But if you deal, let's say, in this case, 70 damage on a turn, you've killed 2 heads. And if it doesn't die at the end of the turn, 4 are sprouting forward. However, unless it has taken fire damage since its last turn. So if you manage to deal some form of fire damage, you'll live, you'll get that whole cauterizing the heads thing that's common from, again, Hercules and dealing with the Hydra. And it regains 10 hit points for each head regrown. So in that example, I said if you didn't deal fire damage and you dealt 70 damage to it and it grew 4 heads back, it would get 40 more hit points back. So not only is it getting more heads to do more things to you, it also is healing. They both have reactive heads, which is for each head the Hydra has beyond the first one, it gets an extra reaction. So if your Hydra's starting with 8 heads, it has 8 reactions, so each one can make a reactionary opportunity attack. That's pretty much the only option for reactions it has, so that'll be 8 options for that. It also has Wakeful. While the Hydra sleeps, at least one of its head is awake, right? So he can't be surprised because it's got 8 heads. One of them is awake. And it has multi-attack, which multi-attack is it has as many bites as it has heads. The reach is 15 feet on the bite. It does 2d10 plus 6 piercing damage. So it's pretty solid. If you're killing it and not taking the heads out, you're just adding to the number of attacks it can make each turn. Again, also to the number of reactions. The base Hydra, the Ironscale Hydra, has the benefit of being immune to acid damage, and then it also has, again, this kind of xenomorphic ability where it has acidic blood. Similar to what we talked about with the Remorhaz in the last one, this does, if you deal damage to it within 5 feet, you take 2d8 acid damage. So, and this is also gargantuan as opposed to huge. So this is a much larger Hydra. Again, I really like this concept. We saw this on some older edition Hydras as well. And I like the concept, sometimes they give them breath weapons, and I like the idea of different elemental Hydras, right? An acid Hydra, a thunder Hydra, a lightning Hydra, a cold Hydra, and you can kind of mess around, basically use this as a template, maybe shrink it down if you want it to be huge and not gargantuan in size, and then you could just do this same thing, make it have, fire blood, freezing blood, chilling blood, whatever you want to call it, and then if you want, you can tack a breath weapon on it as well. Number 4. The Assassin Bug. This is a creature of nightmares for a lot of reasons. This comes to us from Mordenkainen's Fiendish Folio Volume 1. I don't know if we're ever going to get a Volume 2, but this is basically an extra life thing. If you don't know, Dungeons & Dragons, Wizards of the Coast usually do extra life pushes once a year to generate money for extra life, and as part of it, they usually release something, right? They've done the Turtle package and one grung above, basically adding new races or other things to the game. But to get it, you have to donate to Extra Life, and that's how you purchase it. Mordenkainen's Fiendish Folio was a series of old school monsters brought to 5e, and one of those is this Assassin Bug. So this is, as you can see, kind of a wasp-like creature, but it has a terrifying ability in this ovipositor, which we'll talk about in just a sec, right? Resistance to poison, immunity to paralysis, keen smell. It makes 2 bite attacks. Its bites, nothing crazy. D10 plus 2 damage is a decent amount. A constitution saving throw or be poisoned for a minute. While poisoned, you are also paralyzed, but you can repeat the save at the end of your turn, and the DC is only 11 to beat that. It does have 50-foot fly speed, so it can zip around quite a bit, but the danger is in the ovipositor attack. If it hits you, you are infested with a D3 assassin bug eggs, which immediately hatch into assassin bug maggots. So this thing pricks you with its ovipositor, you have maggots in you immediately. At the start of each of your turns, you take a D6 piercing damage per maggot infesting you, right? We see that's a D3. If you roll, the DM rolls well or poorly, depending on how you look at it, you have 3 maggots in you. Here's the thing. Well, let me keep reading and then we'll come back to the thing, right? So you take a D6 piercing damage at the start of each of your turns. So if you have 3 maggots in you, 3d6 piercing damage. Applying fire to the bite wound before the end of the target's next turn deals 1 fire damage to the target and kills the maggots. However, after that initial turn, they are too far under the skin to be burned. They can therefore no longer be burnt with fire damage. If a target infested by an assassin bug maggot ends its turn with 0 hit points, it dies as they burrow into its heart and kill it. Any effect that cures disease kills the maggots as well, which is something nice. But here's the thing. Remember I was talking about the thing? There's no limit to how many maggots you can have inside you at a time. So if you throw a swarm or a handful of assassin bugs at a party, and they all target one person and they get stuck with 4 ovipositors, let's say, and you roll stellarly with a 3 each time on your D3, this party member now has 12 maggots in them. which means at the start of their turn, they're taking 12d6 piercing damage. And if nobody gets to it with fire, doesn't have access to fire, doesn't know that burning the wound causes these bugs to die, they're going to be taking 12d6 damage every turn. And unless someone's able to cure their disease immediately, or you're basically that, I guess. If they're not able to cure their disease once they've burrowed deep enough in, if they get down to 0 hit points, they die because the maggots burrow into their heart. This is terrifying. It's right up there with a facehugger and xenomorphs. It's slot eggs and chest bursters. It's up there. It's terrifying. This is a bad day. A lot of people don't know about this creature because not a lot of people are aware of Mordenkainen's Fiendish Folio. This is a great way. I mean, you could have your players going into what they think is like a giant wasp nest, and it's actually an assassin bug nest, and everybody's going to have a bad time. Number 3. The Frostworm from Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. Now, I debated between the Frostworm here and the Purple Worm. As you can see, they are very similar in nature. This is basically a purple worm that's been adapted to a cold climate. We'd also seen Frostworms back in 3.5. I like those a little bit better. The design was more mandible than like Trimouth. And they also had a breath weapon, an ice breath weapon. This one doesn't. It has a trill ability, which we'll talk about. But yeah, it's vulnerable to fire damage, immune to cold, kind of makes sense. So it's not as devastating as a Purple Worm, because the Purple Worm doesn't have those vulnerabilities. Has blind sight and tremor sense, as you would expect. It has freezing body, similar to what we had talked about with the Remorhaz, except it's dealing cold damage. If you're within 5 feet of it, 3d6 cold damage. It has the death burst ability we were just talking about with the Remorhaz, right? When it dies, it explodes in a burst of frigid energy. Each creature within 60 feet of it must make a DC 20 dex save or take 8d6 cold damage, basically a fireball. Creatures inside the worm, when it dies, automatically fail the save throw, right? If it swallows you and it blows up, you're going to take that damage no matter what. So you could, again, apply this over to the Remorhaz and just make it fire damage. Tunneler, right, as it burrows through the rock and the ground, it leaves a tunnel behind it that people can follow in. And it makes 2 attacks. Makes 2 bite attacks, or it's trill and a bite attack. So it's bite, 10-foot reach, a 3d8 plus 9 piercing damage plus 3d6 cold. If they're large or smaller, they must make a dex save or be swallowed. So it's a bite and swallow in one, rather than a bite, restrain, and then a wait for a swallow. It's all at the same time. And then again, it'll follow standard swallow and regurgitation rules. Just again, when I say that, the mechanics are standard, just the numbers change depending on the creature. And then it also has its trill ability, which it emits here a haunting cry. Each creature within 60 feet that can hear it must make a DC 20 wisdom save or be stunned for a minute. The creature can repeat the save at the end, can repeat the saving throw each time it takes a damage and at the end of its turns, ending the effect on a success. Once you succeed, you are immune for 24 hours, and they are immune to this effect. Which I do think is interesting, because by that nature, dragons are not immune to dragons' frightful presence, if you look at it. But this one specifically adds this bit about how they're immune to their own effects. So, I love purple worms. I think they're really great. I'm a huge fan of Tremors, right? Obviously, if you've seen Tremors, you know Graboids. And I love that series. So anything that kind of can replicate that, which is why I seem to really enjoy, as we've seen so far on this list, burrowing creatures. Because, that concept of something coming up under the ground when you think you're safe indoors or just like not anywhere. People get the concept of fear of the ocean and fear of water from things like Jaws, right? Because you're in the water and everything's unknown below you. But when you're on solid ground, in theory, you should be safe, but these guys can come up out of the ground and then make nothing safe. And I really enjoy that. I just wish I would personally, again, if I was going to run Frostworms in my game, I would drop the Trill ability while it is unique and interesting. And I would replace it with a breath weapon similar to the original, just because I'm a fan of the old school one. But honestly, you could do both, right? Maybe one's a mutation, right? The breath weapon maybe is a mutation. Maybe a dragon mated with a Frostworm and made a new alpha Frostworm that has the breath weapon. And then you could do a whole encounter with a breath weapon one, and then also ones with the Trill, which could really mess things up if people are stunned. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. Do you like this one? Do you like the Frostworm here, the kind of concept of one with a breath weapon, or the old ones, if you know what I'm talking about? Or do you like purple worms better? Number 2. As big as a lion, but more powerfully compact, The monster looks like a cross between a rhinoceros and a beetle. Thick gray plates cover tough leathery skin all over its body and extending down its 6 powerful legs. Its spade-shaped head bears no horn, but instead splits open to reveal a toothy maw. That's right, continuing on my concept of burrowing creatures, we have the Bulette. Now, for all of the people out there that will tell me it's pronounced Bulette or anything like that, yes, I know that's how French would pronounce it, and you may tell me that that's how Gary Gygax originally intended it. D&D Beyond, when it has this little button here, has a pronunciation guide that was officially vetted out and confirmed by Wizards of the Coast, the people who own the game. So if we click this, we'll hear someone pronouncing it and see how it's supposed to be said. Ready?
Bulette.
That's Matt Mercer saying, one more time,
Bulette.
Bulette. That's how it's pronounced. So for all of you who like to make your silver Bulette jokes or your Coors Light kind of, make your bar the silver Bulette, that's an option. It makes sense now, right? All right, so why do I like these guys? Again, we talked about how I like burrowing creatures and graboids, and this is basically combining essentially the concept of Jaws from the last video with the concept of a graboid. So a land shark is basically what a Bulette is. And I really like them. I think there's some interesting background around them, and like the way they're in mated pairs and people have never seen babies, and interesting stuff behind them in the lore if you really do some digging. Again, they have tremor sense, which means they can obviously sense tremors through the ground. But what's interesting is they have fully functional eyes and dark vision, so they don't need to just rely on tremor sense, similar to some of these other ones that have vibrations and sounds like a graboid. These things can see you. They can pop up out of the ground and be like, oh, there you are, I'm coming for you. So they have both going for them. They have this standing leap ability, which is nutty, right? Their long jump is 30 feet and their high jump is 15 feet. You wouldn't think this large, tanky rhino beetle thing could leap 15 feet vertically, but they can, which means you really got to think about this when you're trying to get away from one of these things. If they're circling around on the ground, again, similar to what we saw in things like Tremors, you got to get 15 or 16 feet up so this thing, or actually I guess 20, so it can't attack you if it makes that jump. Its bite attack, 4d12 plus 4d12s, vastly underrated. Not a lot of things use them in 5th edition. A couple of player options can get you access to a d12, but as a DM, nothing feels great as rolling 4d12, or better yet, critting and rolling 8d12. That's a fun time. And then also, combining the leap and the bite, we have the deadly leap ability. If it jumps at least 15 feet as part of its movement, which we know it can do 30 feet long jump, 15 feet vertical, so plenty of options for that, it can then use its action to land on its feet, all 6 of them, in a space that contains 1 or more creatures. Right? It's large, so that's 2x2 in a grid, so it could land on potentially up to 4 people. Each of them will need to make a strength or dexterity saving throw, bummer that the target gets to choose, or be knocked prone and take 3d6 plus 4 bludgeoning damage, plus 3d6 plus 4 slashing damage. So 8d6 plus 8 damage. On a successful save, they take half damage and aren't knocked prone and are pushed 5 feet out of its space and into an unoccupied space. If no unoccupied space is within range, the creature instead falls prone in its space. So if it's smart when it jumps, if it does this in an open field and people fail, they'll get knocked prone. If they succeed, they'll get knocked out away from it. But if it does this to someone who's in a corner and it can't push them out because there's nowhere for them to be shoved, then they just get knocked prone anyway. So it has you can still get the effect you want, the damage won't be as good. I like throwing these out there. I would love to see folks' options for what they would do to homebrew and make a more powerful version. Obviously, there's a lot of fun things you can do too with, if you allow your player to deal stuff with monster bits and making armor. I like the concept of bullet plate, or I guess a bullet plate, right? Or a bullet-proof vest. I just thought of that one now, and I hate myself for saying it out loud, but it is what it is. Let me know your thoughts. Do you guys like bullets? There's also this concept here, right, about how somebody maybe breeded a snapping turtle and an armadillo with demon ichor, and that's how they were created in the first place. Similar concept to how like owlbears were formed. I really like, who is this guy? Who is this wizard who's out there just ruining adventurers' days by making weird creatures? I don't know. That could actually be a really fun concept for a campaign. Figuring out who that guy is and trying to undo their work. Number 1. You feel a rumble at your feet. The ground shifts, and before you can react, an insectoid creature the size of a warhorse bursts forth. Plated in a dark carapace, this beast clambers from its burrow, mandibles chittering in anticipation. Spindly limbs carry it forward, and its clawed forelegs swipe for you. That's right, we're doing another burrowing monster. This time it's the Ankheg. I really like, again, apparently burrowing creatures specifically in this video, but I like Ankhegs a lot because they basically cover everything that we talked about, right? They have tremor sense, they can burrow up out of the ground, they have a bite attack that does decent damage, right, in 2d6 plus 3 slashing plus a d6 acid. They're challenge rating 2, so they're one of my favorite monsters to throw at low-level parties. They do a grapple, and if the target is grappled, they have advantage on attack rolls to bite them again. So not fully restrained, but just a grapple with basically the benefits in some aspects of restraint. And they can spit acid, which is awesome. A 30-foot wide, or 30-foot long, 5-foot wide line of acid, DC 13 dex save, or 3d6 acid damage. I like playing mine up to be, again, I've been talking about xenomorphs a lot. I like talking and playing mine up like xenomorphs, right? Burrowing people, pulling them underground. I like to give mine acidic blood, similar to some of the other ones we've seen, where if they slash them, it deals acid damage to the people who attack them. I don't know. I just really like them. And there's something I always just enjoy, like the, hey, you're in the town and the farmer's workers have gone missing. What's going on? And they go to investigate the farm, and then there's an Ankheg or a series of Ankhegs that pop up out of the ground. It's just a really fun low-level encounter that I really enjoy running, and I don't know why. It's just something that I really like doing, and these guys have stuck to me. They're one of the first things you see when you open the monster manual, because they're right at the beginning, and I've always enjoyed them. They kind of have a funky lobster bug aspect, so I'm a fan of that. It even has sort of like the xenomorphic kind of crown head shape there, or like looks like the xenomorph queen. You could also do that with an Ankheg queen and run something very similar to an aliens, just with that. Then you have to make up some cool, basically Ankheg face hugger, which is an amazing concept that I love, that I just thought of, which I think I should do. I don't know. You're probably sick of burrowing creatures that deal reactive damage and things like that, but I really enjoy them. So that is my top 10 monstrosities. I tried to get stuff from a variety of different challenge ratings. Again, other things that I really like that were out there, I don't know. There's some really interesting ones. I like Gorthok the Thunderboar from Dragon of Icespire Peak because it sounds like a Yu-Gi-Oh card. Like, I played Gorthok the Thunderboar in defense mode. I really like, I think it's called Thousand Teeth. It's like a specific ancient crocodile creature from Ghosts of Saltmarsh. I don't know. There's just so many good monstrosities out there that it was a hard time for me to really sit down and pick out 10. Like I said, I had a huge long list at the start. I tried to go through and grab ones that I thought were interesting, but I realized that apparently I mostly just grabbed burrowing creatures, right? Basilisks fall into that area, right? Those are always fun. I like Bahirs because I like the lore behind giants creating these creatures to fight dragons. I don't know why they only made them immune to lightning damage and dealing lightning damage when there are tons of other dragons out there. I don't know. I like the Cockatrice, also a really interesting one. I really like the Deep Crows. That's one I would recommend you look up if you haven't seen from Acquisitions Incorporated. There's the Deep Crow and the Ancient Deep Crow. They're basically sort of like fiendish, like crows with like a mandible mouth. They're kind of terrifying. Doppelgangers, froghemoths. There's a ton of great options out there. You won't, if you just focused on the monstrosity section creature type, you could have an entire campaign and have it be wildly different by the different options you have. Thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for continuing to support me and the channel. Thank you also again to our folks at Describe for sponsoring this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.